Oh, I got it. Oh, you are there. No, I got it. We're good. Thank you, Sue.
Yep.
Oh, I got it. Oh, you are there. No, I got it. Okay, I'm closing that because that I can't do.
And I see Paige.
Okay, I will start recording now. Okay, so we are recording and on YouTube.
Great. Okay, so it is 5:03. I'm going to call the meeting to order. It is Tuesday, April the 6th, and first item on the agenda is any public comment. Do we have anyone from the public?
We don't in the meeting here. I'm letting Dean in right now.
Okay, perfect.
Just closed out the YouTube, so I can't see that right now. But people can follow me here if they'd like.
Hey, sorry I'm late. Can you hear me okay?
Hi, Dean. Hey, Dean.
And
Do I have to wait? Okay, just yes or no? Yes. Okay, thank you. Paige just made varsity lacrosse.
congratulations.
Okay, so I am now driving. It's going to take me about 5 minutes to get to the office. So could I have someone else maybe lead as far as like the norms and the recommendation to approve the minutes?
Yeah, I can get us through that.
Okay, thank you.
Did you guys already call the meeting to order?
We did.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So if we're ready to go, let's just take a second to review the norms. Okie dokie. And can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
I'll move.
Second.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion?
No.
Not for me.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so minutes are adopted. And hold on one second because I lost my agenda here.
Well, I think now we're up to the report of the superintendent.
Yep. Okay. So every time I click to talk in Zoom, it minimizes everything else on the screen. And because I literally just got home, I haven't had time to set it up properly. So I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yes. Report of the superintendent, please.
Okay, so there's a draft that says action. There's really, you can approve the work plan, but it is a work in progress. So I just started a work plan, and you'll see on this the informational meeting on the 22nd, and then you'll have your organizational meeting in the middle of May. So just because of this year, your schedule is off a little bit from what it typically is. But your plan is usually pretty simple, just because of their and the only thing that we might want to add in here after at some point is whether there's community engagement work that ends up being added should you decide to go in that direction. So you can approve this, but I also would say that it's going to be continually updated based on what happens over the course of the year.
Okay. So would you like a motion to approve it kind of in its current iteration with the idea that we would amend it as necessary?
Yes.
So moved.
Okay. All right. Do you have a second?
Second.
Okay.
All righty. Any discussion?
No.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Great. Thank you.
Okay. So the next item is to prepare for the annual meeting. So I know that it was late this afternoon, and I really appreciate Sue working to get a draft of this updated for you for today. So I'm happy to share it on my screen, or if you have copies of it, we can just talk about it as well. I think either way is fine. What would you prefer?
I have no preference.
Meredith and Dean, do you have a copy that you can reference?
Yeah, I have it pulled up right here.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so then let's just talk through it. Essentially, I took exactly the same format we've been using and updated it. And so I'm assuming that that's okay, but we can talk about that. I was thinking it's often helpful for people to have a familiar rhythm now that we've been doing it for 3 or 4 years. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, I really appreciate you guys sort of updating it as necessary.
Well, Sue, you should really thank Sue. So
Thank you, Sue.
she's very quick at being able to pull this stuff because she's got it all on her computer much more easily than I do. So we started by, putting in the mission statement at the beginning of the presentation. Any questions about that? You want to continue leaving that in there?
I think it's helpful. I mean, I always think it's a good reminder to remember, why we're here and why we're doing what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
The second, it's actually the third slide, but is putting the tax rate. We've started with the tax rate historically. And so you'll see that there's a slight decrease in taxes at this point that are proposed. Okay, does that seem fine to include that right now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then we included a slide with prior year tax rates. So we went all the way from FY13 through the projected FY22 for comparison for your taxpayers. Fine. Thoughts?
Yep.
Good.
I think that's really helpful to have the historic rates too.
Okay. And then looking at the student counts, the FTE, full-time equivalent student counts. So I think this is particularly helpful right now to look at where we are with projected students, as well as the trend for the last, 8 years.
Yeah, I like having that along with the year-over-year tax rates too.
Well,
Yeah.
and the thing that I really love about that is it really highlights how with planning, we can increase our numbers without significantly affecting the tax rate.
Correct. I agree with that.
Okay, and then we just put the breakdown of students on here. So we've got anticipated students, we've got these GO students, and how we're calculating the budgeted students in there. Okay, I think that's helpful for people to understand.
Mm-hmm.
And then Sue, I highlighted these because I think we still need to update this. Is the BBA announced tuition 20,490?
As far as I know, it is.
Okay.
We put in print in the package. I hope it's right. I did look it up before we went to print. So
Okay, and then I think then it's just the math on the bottom that we need to update.
Yeah, the
that's right.
16842.
I wasn't sure which was wrong, so I highlighted both of them.
No, the 16842 is right. The 16842 is the announced tuition rate. Okay, so if we're not a sending town, then the parents, the tuition's 2492, will pay 16842. They'll be responsible for 36.
Oh, I'm sorry. I got
Got
you.
it.
Yep.
That's like the state average.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Exactly.
Yep.
I know it's confusing.
Okay.
So we're not paying the difference between BBA, what they're charging, and what we're getting in town tuitioning.
Well,
Paying the 18,490 if the voters approve it, just like we
That's
would
right.
every year. And so the 2490 never comes into play. It's what would come into play if the voters didn't approve the 18,490.
Okay.
so we've always presented this so that people understand if you don't vote for the BBA sending town rate, this is what you can expect to be paying.
And I think that's probably what, you know, Jennifer, when you're doing this presentation, right, that's what you get into. We don't sort of have to type all this out because that can be explained when you're going over the presentation.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, smooth transition. She just slid right in.
Yeah, that was pretty good, Jen.
What did I just
And
agree
you
to?
like, yeah, and you got off your phone and got on Zoom, and it was
Didn't
really
miss
it
a
was nice.
beat.
Yeah, we've been doing this for a year. It's amazing what we can do now that we could not do a year ago.
That's right.
Just so that I'm clear, when we say ghost students, we're talking about the usual 10 or 15 kids that we account for. And so when we say we're going down to 3 point whatever ghost students, we're saying we're instead of budgeting for an extra 10 or 15, we're going to do 3 because that's exactly the number we need to stay under penalty.
You got it. And really on the tuition spreadsheet, I call it new enrollment because that's really what it is. It's we're expecting to have new students. And so it's new enrollment.
Right.
Historically, the use of ghost students has just been out there. So I think people are used to it. We can always change that terminology if we want to.
No, it's fine. I've heard that terminology used in a different context before.
Oh, okay.
So
Well, it's being used right now for students who have fallen off a district's radar or a school's
Oh.
radar
Yeah.
because of COVID.
So maybe we
So
do want to change it.
I had a similar thought, Dean. That's interesting that you raised that because I that jumped out at me as well.
Would you like me to change it to new enrollment? It's certainly easy enough to do.
we could call
I
them
think
phantom
so.
students.
I think so. Or new
Unknown students.
unknown, right. Yeah. It might trigger a response this year that it hasn't in the past. Like, oh, are these 3 kids that we haven't seen in school, right? Like there could be a new element of confusion there.
Yeah, and I hadn't realized that that term was being used in an alternate way. So I could understand that that would be confusing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Okay, I think maybe we should change it then. If I'm not
Yeah,
the only
Sue's-
one that picked up on that, then probably other people will too.
Yeah, Sue's updating it right now. We're both in the document itself.
Cool,
So.
perfect.
So then that'll also come in on this next slide where we talk about the BBA sending town rate. So we're updating that right now as well. So this is where we talk about explaining to your taxpayers that, you know, why this idea of BBA sending town rate. You may have, you know, you're going to have a number of new families. So this is probably important information that they haven't, you know, may not be familiar with. Okay.
I changed the language on the third bullet in here a little bit. Last year we had said we were talking about including the BBA rate or including the BBA rate not triggering the penalty on the tax rate. And I didn't like that language because I don't really feel like it's the BBA rate that triggers the penalty. I think it can contribute to it, but we have so much that we're working with in order to determine whether or not we stay out of penalty. It's just one factor. So,
Well, and it's also the BBA rate because we pay higher than state average that would prevent us from being excluded.
exactly, but that's not necessarily triggering a penalty, right? They're kind of two different things.
Yeah.
So I just changed the language a little just to clarify that, you know, in these numbers, we are including paying the BBA sending town rate. So we're including what we're asking the voters to vote on, basically.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. And then the next slide is just the FY21 and FY22 comparison of how the tax rate's calculated. I think people tend to like this information, so keeping
I'll
that
have
in.
Celeste clean up that slide. It's me doing a cut and paste and I don't do that well. So I'll ask her to fix that.
Okay. And then the next one is your fund balances. So I think this is helpful. It shows what's in tax stabilization, what's in the best reserve, and what you've got in the general fund for the last 3 fiscal years. Okay.
So Sue, excuse me, going back to June 30th, oh no, I guess it's this June 30th, we will have a deficit of 245, 583 in our general fund.
Well, that's just the anticipated number as of January when we fixed all of this.
Right.
You know, I can tell you since then, I know some kids have moved out. I can also tell you we got some higher service fees on some kids on plans. So, you know, things are still constantly changing and that number could go up or down. So
Okay.
right now, at snapshot in time, that's what it was anticipated at.
Okay, but basically we're going to have to address that, whatever it is, when we're thinking about our FY23 budget, correct?
Correct. And so I added the next slide to sort of talk about that.
Yeah, okay.
And I've reworded this like 10 times. So you guys feel free to edit and talk about what you want.
No, I think it looks good. I mean, this is, in my opinion, this is probably the most important slide in the thing because
I thought so too.
It's trying to explain, you know, where we ended up after, because I can tell you right now that everybody knows that this was a challenging year, but nobody knows exactly why it was challenging or how we figured out how to manage it. I hear conflicting things from different people about, you know, some people think we're completely screwed and the tax rate's going to be like, you know, 20 cents. And some people, you know, think it's going to be, you know, not that big of a deal. And so I think that this is kind of our chance to lay it out. This is where we ended up, and this is what we decided to do and why. I think a lot of people are probably going to be surprised that there's not a huge tax rate increase.
And then there's a tax cut.
because the zeitgeist right now from people I talk to just in passing seems to be that everyone is under the assumption that we're in big trouble. And I think that people are going to be surprised when they see that the tax rate is not going to go up. So I think that this is a good chance for us to explain why.
At least not this year.
Right.
Yeah, we just kind of kicked that can down the road a little bit, but you know, then
right.
Who knows?
But this is our chance to explain why kicking the can down the road is actually the right thing to do.
Right.
You know what I mean? As opposed to, oh, we're just going to put it off and deal with it later. It's like, well, no, actually there are really tangible financial benefits to dealing with it later because we have much more flexibility in how we resolve a deficit than we do if we try to, like, you know, guess really well about what's going to happen.
Right. And I mean, it doesn't make sense to try to increase the number of unknown students beyond 3.13 because that will just trigger the penalty before we even start the year. So I think this all makes a lot of sense, but I agree with Dean. I think that slide is sort of like the, you know, the most important slide on there maybe, because it really does explain our thinking and, you know, your thinking. And it makes sense under the circumstances.
And we've updated it even since I shared it with you. So I will send it to you in an updated, so you've got the additional information. It's a little bit more comprehensive right now than what I sent to you, you know, an hour ago.
Okay.
So
are we also going to, or are you going to prepare the booklets to hand out?
They're done. Yep. They're all done.
Right here.
Thank you.
We're going with yellow this year, right? They're yellow this year?
Yeah.
Yellow.
I can't keep track of the colors that we have for everything. So yeah, they're done. They look good.
Great. Thank you very much for doing that.
Sure. And then the last slide is just this basic 2-bullet summary. Tax rate, and the proposed tax rate includes maintaining sending down status of BBA. So I think, you know, bottom lining it at the end is helpful for taxpayers.
Mm-hmm.
So that's it.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
I will say that we used a similar, because we had, just as point of for your information, we needed to do informational hearings for the other 2 districts in the BRSU, and we used a similar format that you used in there. Both meetings were very well received. So I built on the plan that we had done with you and used it at those meetings, and people found it very helpful there too. So.
Well, I have to give credit because I think that was Jackie Wilson's idea the first year that we did it, which at the time I did not appreciate just how helpful it would be. I think it's enormously helpful. So I'm really glad that we're doing it.
Mhm. So we have the informational meeting is scheduled. We're going to talk about that later, but April 22nd. And then the annual meeting is on the 27th. Right. So just in prep for this annual meeting, I am bringing a lapel mic, the projector. I'll bring an extension cord.
For the informational meeting?
No, for the annual meeting. Sorry
Okay.
if I just misspoke. Yeah, for the annual meeting. And hopefully there's internet. If not, we can use a hotspot if there's cell service. Is there cell service at the garage?
Dean?
I don't spend enough time there to know.
You're probably not going there to use the internet either.
I'm sure that they will have some sort of system worked out. Worst case, we could probably just load it onto a USB if we didn't have internet, right? Just play it off there.
Yes. I can download it. Yes, I can download it. Yep.
I would
That's
say
totally
just to be
fine.
safe,
I will.
probably have a hard copy, and then we don't need it if we don't have it.
Yep.
I heard that I heard that you reached out to find out if they were going to have internet, and the answer you got was, I don't know.
Well, no, I think the answer I got was it was a little spotty. Sometimes yes, sometimes no, and no one could really divine the reason, why it was the way it was.
Can't say that I'm surprised.
Like,
But
okay.
I'm sure we're not the only ones that are going to need some sort of connection in order to do our presentation.
Yeah.
And we're first this year, correct?
Okay.
I think we are. I'm asking.
I
you
don't
flip?
know.
Doesn't Winhall flip every year? Okay, so last year we were second
Okay.
because it was the first time I had the opportunity to sit through that portion of the town meeting.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else about the annual meeting that you want to touch base about?
Nope.
Okay. All right. I think we're in good shape.
All right.
All right. So the next topic is community engagement. And this is an open discussion at this point to, to really think about, I had proposed this idea of you as a school board talking to community members about the idea of school choice, maintaining K-12 choice, and getting a sense of, the scope of your community's support of that, and to try to get a better understanding holistically from your community about where might that tipping point be for, hey, we might need to reconsider this because we've reached a tipping point on the tax rate. Because the thought was that if you have that information from your public, that you've really spent time collecting it, engaging with them, talking, then as you move forward, you've got some information to help guide your decision making and your actions as a board. So that's sort of the proposed idea that I came to you with. And I think, I would recommend that you talk about that idea, see whether it's something that you do want to do as a board or some version of that that's different than what I just said. And then if so, what might be some ways that we could talk through completing the community engagement work? Sorry about my cat walking.
Here's my cat.
So I like the idea of community engagement because, we have been elected to sort of represent the greater Winhall community, which is comprised of, people of every age and every, background experience. So I think there's a lot of value in having these conversations. I'm not sure I would want to pitch it as, what's your tipping point with school choice? I think there's probably, maybe I would feel more comfortable speaking in more broad terms about, what do you value about school choice? What don't you like about school choice? and sort of come at it that way, without sort of this presumption that someday there, I mean, and it's entirely possible that the day will come that we will abandon our choice model because of a variety of factors. But I think I don't necessarily want to start off with the end in mind, because we don't know what the end is.
If I don't know I don't know what added benefit finding out what people value or don't value does for you as a board. Because right now you have a structure that is in place, and people's personal opinions about how they feel about it doesn't really influence your work as a board. But when I think about I think you have to identify, like I'm thinking about the purpose. The purpose would be to get information from your community to actually inform your work. And your work is making educational decisions for your community. So I do think that if you're going to go through this process, the only thing you have to really do as a non-operating board is collect information from your taxpayers about information to inform your decision making. If that makes sense. Otherwise, I don't know that there is a lot of purpose for community engagement, because you're not operating a school, you're not setting ends policies for me to inform the work. I don't know if that makes sense or not. I just would hate for you to have to go through what you went through this year every single year, because you as 3 people are trying to figure out what your community wants without really having anything to guide you.
So are you thinking of this, Randy, as simple as, what's your tipping point? Is it, $2.05? Is it $2.12? Is it $2.50?
I think it's, from my perspective, it may be numerical, and it also may be, people may have other ways that they view it. If I can't pay my taxes and I have to move, I've reached my tipping point, right? I think it's important for you as a board to consider you have very new residents who may give you one piece of information. You have people who've been here, who moved here, who are residents, I would say, quote unquote, for the long haul for the education of their children. And you have long-time Winhall residents who have lived here for maybe most of their life. I think it's helpful for you to understand where people are across those and any other group that is in your community, because you haven't asked them before.
It sounds to me like, based on the way you're talking about it and the kind of information that we're looking for, it almost feels like the best way to get the information would be to put a poll and to poll people about, okay, so are you a new resident? Are you a longtime resident? So we can get that information, and then say, are you happy with the current tax rate? Can you afford the current tax rate? And then, if the tax rate were to go up by 5 cents, would that be a problem? If it were to go up by 10 cents, by 20 cents, by $1, it almost sounds like that's kind of what I'm hearing, is that we need to figure out where everyone is. So we need to figure out, how does everyone feel about it across the wide spectrum, but we need specific numbers. We can't just be like, how do you feel about school choice? We have to be like, would you still support school choice if the tax rate was $2 instead of $1.70 or whatever it is now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm proposing that you talk about it, because if you don't think this information is important to you as a board, then there's no real reason to complete the community engagement work. But if you do think that it's helpful for you as a board to have some more input from your community members, then you could talk about, taking the idea and adjusting it or shifting it or whatever. I think you need to figure out what information
So I guess I'm trying to understand really what would we get from this? So I think, I can look at the population growth that we've experienced in the last year, which tends to be greater than other towns in Vermont. So I think one could infer that people are moving to Winhall because they value school choice. With regard to the tipping point, I mean, we've all had those years where, I don't know about everyone else, but like we certainly had to tighten our belt, and it was a most unwelcome surprise to figure out what the tax rate was going to be. But then, what's the choice? You move because the next year the tax rate may go back down again. And, basically we had 2 high years. And other than that, it's, if you look at the last decade, we've kind of been in the same general area. I've noticed that when we have a tax rate that's basically, where it is, people tend to either not show up to town meeting, or it's a very quick affair. And I don't know that, knowing what a tipping point is in the tax rate would personally make me work any, less hard to keep the tax rate down. If I found out that most people in Winhall are comfortable with $2 for the tax rate, I would still try to get it down to, 178. Because I mean, I think, the way I view our job is that, we're trying to plan, which is challenging. I mean, I think that's where the biggest challenge is, but we're trying to plan for growth and keep the tax rate down. So I don't know. I mean, it feels like it's a little bit of an existential exercise to say, what dollar figure would I then say this is too much? I don't know. I mean, it kind of depends on everything else that's going on in my life.
I don't think that's the right way to. I don't think that's the right way to approach it. And if I made it sound like that's what I was saying, then maybe I misspoke. But I don't think you can ask people at what dollar amount would you reach your tipping point. But I think we can get answers to some of the questions you alluded to if we feel that it's important. If we had people take like an anonymous survey, right? And we could ask questions like, did K through 12 choice have a significant impact on your decision to move to Winhall? Like that would give us, let's say 100 people responded, right, to the survey. We can find out how many of them did move to Winhall, right? So let's say 100 people responded and 50 of them didn't move. They've been here for 10 plus years, right? But we could even ask a question like that, have you lived in Winhall? How long have you lived in Winhall? Or have you lived in Winhall more than 5 years or more than 10 years or more than 15 years? And if you moved here in the last 10 years, did K through 12 choice play a significant role in your decision to move here? Again, I don't know. I think what Randy's asking is this information that we need or want as a board? But I feel like we often make assumptions about why people feel the way they do without ever having any real data to back it up. And we often go back to, well, how many people are this or how many people are that? And I think that if we had a poll, if we wanted to, we could figure out what kinds of questions we would want and try to tailor the questions to get the sort of answers we're looking for. And then we might have some of that information if we felt it was valuable. But I think Randy's right. I think we need to decide if that's information that we want or need in order to do our job as a board. Because if it isn't, then there's no point.
Like, what are we looking for? What do we hope to get out of this?
That's the question.
Right. So
if there's nothing that you need as a board by engaging with your community, then you don't need to do the work. And that's the conversation right now.
And Meredith, you've been quiet.
I think it's really challenging to ask a question when there's a lot of different variables and factors that could potentially impact the answer. So, to say, to say what's your pain point, I think that depends on whether you have a job, how well, things are going financially for you and possibly your family. And I think that it's really, it's hard to kind of, I understand the desire to have the information, but I'm not really sure what we're going to do with the information, because we don't need it right now.
Yeah, we might need it in the future, depending
And
on how things go.
I'm okay to have the conversation with people, but I think part of it is it's just going to stir up a lot of I don't know. I think we have to be very sensitive in how we ask the question, and I think we have to be really almost more sensitive in terms of why are we looking at this data? Because it's going to start to freak people out.
Could I suggest, I mean, I think if I sort of scale back on the community engagement, I think what would be really helpful is to, particularly for all of the new members of our community, to have a crash course on how does our budget get set? What are the factors that, play into that? What is it as a board that we struggle with? How do we do our job? I think all of that is incredibly valuable communication. I think questions, getting to the tax rate or something like that, that all feels really, really hypothetical until we have something that we're really talking about. So let's say in a year, now we're looking at, special ed, block granting, whatever. And
Waiting
let's say,
study.
yeah. So let's say the weighting study, let's say that is this.
And the weighting study, by the way, to go back, the weighting study is something that's absolutely going to negatively impact Winhall's tax rate.
So hold that thought, because let's say that, the weighting study is completed, it's being implemented. Now we've got real numbers that we're going to be confronted with. And, if we're talking about sending out a poll, I would think that, in September, we could see, something happening. We could send out a poll. We could have, information back and crunch numbers by the next meeting or the meeting following. But then we've got something actual that we're sort of chewing on. And I feel like that's when people can say
this is why they're doing this. I think I'd like to, so I like the idea of gathering the information. I like the idea because when I first moved here, the process seemed really cryptic and out of my control. So anything we can do to educate in advance would be meaningful. But I also think, if you want to take the information in the context that the weighting study is coming, it could potentially negatively impact our tax rate in our town. That's a very different thing than kind of going, what's your pain point on school choice?
I mean, I actually agree with both of you. I think that it makes way more sense to wait until we have a real reason to put a poll out, and then we might know better what kind of information we need. See, the problem now is I'm sure we could come up with a pretty good list of questions that would give us information that's useful, but by the time we needed to act on that information, the information could be a year or 2 or 3 years out of date, right? The sentiment might change if we poll people today and then poll them again in 3 years. They might have a completely different outlook. Who knows what's going to happen between now and then?
And the composition of our voters may also change in that time frame.
Yeah.
Right. But I think we should think about it. I think we should think about what kinds of questions we want to ask, because I think there are some questions that we're going to want to ask regardless of the situation. Back to what you said before, why are people moving here? Clearly people are moving here and they're bringing their kids with them. So I would like to put if we're going to do a questionnaire, I'd like to ask, how big of an impact did the K through 12 choice, how much did that influence your decision? Not at all, a little bit, quite a bit. It was the only factor. We could put one of those five answer spreads so we get a spectrum of where people fall. That's valuable information for us. What we do with it is up to us, but knowing the answer to that question instead of constantly guessing about why people do what they do would be valuable.
I would also add that if you do that prior to, at some point you would want to, as a board, determine who are the people we want to reach. How do we reach as many people in our community as possible and have that plan ahead of time? because an electronic poll will exclude members of your community and you don't want to do that. So I think if you're looking at potentially having a plan in place for when you would like to do it, Dean's proposing that you think about some questions, at least preliminary. I would also say, ask you to consider, how will you reach people, and who are the groups of people that you would want to reach, so you have all of that work done as well, because it can take a long time to do this. And so the more upfront work you've done before you need it, that will ultimately benefit you.
Does anyone have any idea, when Lissa Stark sends out her email blast, do we know how many people that's hitting in Winhall? And I'm not suggesting that that would be the only way we do it, but that might be, a good way to get a lot of people. And then we can think about, how to reach everyone else. And then think about, how we, everyone gets to fill it out once. Like I wouldn't want to have an email blast and then also have paper copies available at the town clerk's office and potentially have someone do it twice, because I think we would lose the value in that. But the thing with Lissa's email list is that would be a really quick and easy way to get a whole bunch of people.
It would, but it wouldn't solve the problem that Randy's alluding to, which is that there are some people that wouldn't be able to do it electronically.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So then we'd have to figure out how to get the other people and then not duplicate.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but don't we as the school board have the ability to just send out a communication to every voter on the rolls? Like we can send out.
Yeah, you certainly can do that. And you think about things like the community center and the senior lunches, and you think about those other gatherings of things in your community that bring people together that, might not be on regular distribution lists. And you're a small community, so that list is not particularly long, but your select board, and do they have a distribution? And just, Jen, the other districts have done community engagement work and ultimately abandoned the idea of being concerned about people duplicating. Most people aren't interested in filling it out multiple times. It hasn't tended to be a concern or an issue with the other districts. If somebody felt really strongly and wanted to do it twice, it was what it was, I'm sure. But
I just thought that maybe the simplest way might be to, like, everyone gets a town report book every year that comes from the town office. Like we could probably, I'm assuming that if we wanted to actually have like a mail-in questionnaire, it would probably be maybe 2 or 3 pages. And then it would cost money to do that, but it might be the way of making sure that everyone got one. And then we could theoretically do that and have an online poll, and people could choose to fill it out whichever way they wanted. But I agree with Randy. The only problem I see with that is that at the moment, none of those things are really taking place right now. So it's hard to.
It looks like Jim has an idea.
I just a thought that we've tried a bunch of reaching out to the community, and one thing is, if, as Dean just said, you have a 3-page thing, nobody's going to return it. You might think about trying to break this into smaller pieces and, have certain topics and sort of have a plan over time. Then you could also, first go out, figure out how you can best, you think you can reach the community, go out with just a partial survey, see how it works. And then you might have to adjust for the next survey. So, instead of one huge survey, at some point in time, you might break it into smaller pieces, then you might get a better response. And you kind of try to have the community being used to hearing from you instead of this shock hearing from you or something.
That's true. And we can theoretically use the responses from one survey to inform the questions on the following survey. So we could start broad and try to get that kind of broad stroke information, and then we can look at it and say, oh wow, 85% of the people that responded meet this criteria or fall into this bucket. what, maybe we should ask questions that are specifically tailored to that aspect. I mean, I think that's a good idea.
I think also Randy can share with you the Taconic and Green did a survey. She can share, that was a very simple, just a couple of questions, getting a bunch of written responses. Meta, we just did a survey that was more a check the boxes, and can share what those look like with you guys, just so you can see different approaches.
I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think the biggest difference is that the purpose of the survey is very, very different. So structurally, you can see one took a very open-ended, 2-question open-ended issue and had almost 100 responses. And then another one had options that you selected, and they had about 100, a little less than 100, but I'm happy to share both surveys with you. Okay, so I think that this makes sense. I think that you've landed on kind of where you are with this topic for now. The question I have for you is, I guess, are you interested in starting to think at a future meeting about questions, or you want to hold off a little bit until there might be more information? For instance, at this point, we don't know where things stand with the weighting study. It might make sense to wait until we see whether something passes. And then after that, then you might, as a board, be interested in, once you've reviewed it, once we know what passed, then think about questions. What we're looking at doing at the BRSU meeting is having presentations. The BRSU board doesn't meet a lot, but having some presentations on topics that we think are relevant for all districts, and recording that and making it available for you to show. So one of those would be on the weighting study and Act 173. So, that's another way for information to be communicated out to districts.
Yeah, and I think, and you would probably know this better than I, but the last I saw, the weighting study, like there's the proposal to have a committee, 6-person committee, with the idea that they would have their recommendations in place by December of this year, and then like a 3-year phase in. So, we would, if that goes through and becomes law, we would certainly have, we would see sort of the timeline on the horizon.
Right, absolutely. But all of that information is beneficial. So that's part of what we would do in this presentation, and then you could go from there.
Okay.
I think it makes sense to wait, but I certainly am going to at least start trying to think of questions that I think would give us valuable answers. It's not so much to me about getting specific answers, but it's how can you phrase the question in such a way that the response you get gives you valuable information that we can actually act on if we need to.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm certainly going to start thinking about what some of those questions might be now, so that if we do decide that we want to do this, that we have at least
something to start with. Yeah, I think that makes sense.
All right, so then the last piece for me is just a distribution for you of our financial management questionnaire. So there's no discussion or action on that, but just so you're aware of it and have a chance to look at it in your packet. And if you have any questions, you can ask Sue, reach out to her. I'm sure she'll be happy to chat with you about it. So,
all right,
that's it on my end.
Thank you. Board updates. Do we have anything, Randy? I'm sorry, not Randy. Meredith and Dean. My only update is, I think you all know that I'm on the State Board of Ed. I'm now the vice chair of the State Board of Ed. Oh. So I've been working really closely with John Carroll, and it has been, I keep saying like I'm swallowing the ocean of rules applying to education, a couple gallons a day. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot there, but I love it. So it's been a lot of fun.
Nice.
So, and then in the agenda packet, you'll notice that there is a report that actually Jim Salzgiver, who, if anyone in the YouTube land doesn't know, Jim is the chair of the BRSU. So he offered to come to our meeting and just kind of describe what he's doing. And then if we feel it's helpful, he can keep doing it. So with that in mind, Jim, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, just the legislature has been extremely active for, the legislative leadership said all we can do is COVID bills, this year, and they turned out to be total liars on that because they've been going nuts with education and coming up with a whole lot of stuff on education. And a lot of it having a significant impact. I tried to, the thought here was, I'm on the VSBA board and on the executive committee there, so I end up following a lot of the legislative activity fairly closely. And so I thought on behalf of, the BRSU districts, I could try to, if you haven't signed up yet, the VSBA does have a really good legislative blog that keeps you kind of posted on some of the stuff that's happening. What I'm trying to do is make it a little bit more relevant, specific to us, and and sort of noting how it impacts, could impact us locally, what our local legislators, if they've had activity, if they voted on these things, let you know how they voted. So the idea is to basically give you some information that hopefully is a little bit more user friendly than even the VSBA blog, which I think is pretty good. So that's the document. That's the first document that I gave you. The second document I had actually done for the VSBA board, which was an overview of the pension plans, which I did about a couple of months ago, knowing that that was going to blow up to be a big issue, and it certainly has. So that was just to provide board members with enough information so that they feel like they have their arms around what the issues are with pensions, not trying to take any positions, just saying, okay, here's the situation with the pensions, here, is the way that things, could work. So what I tried to, I went to Meadowy's meeting last night, and I said, if you guys want me to go through certain points, fine, but I figured I'd give it to you in writing, and then, it can be Q&A time. And if there are no questions at this point, if you didn't have a chance to look at it, feel free to shoot me an email too. Because I don't want to, take up I don't want to, provide a report and then read it to you at the meeting. That's kind of ridiculous. So, basically, if you have questions, issues, I can also provide some updates, like, on, some of these things they have a significant impact. H81 is the first thing I brought, healthcare negotiations. That's going to have a significant impact around the state. S100, which is we should feed everybody in the schools for free, which is a wonderful concept, but that is kind of off the rails at the moment. Who knows what's going to happen with it? But that was going to cost between estimated between $24 and $40 million to school districts. And then when school districts said you're going to be crowding out our other programming, they said, gee, great, we'll just take it off of the top of the ed fund, which would mean every single school district in the state would have between a 2.5 and a 5% increase in their tax rates. So then they got enough grief, so they sort of backed off at this point, but they still want to do something. They're looking at alternatives. But those are the kind of issues and how they can impact us. For you guys, you're in a little different situation without operating a school. But some of these things, like like an S100 universal meals, would impact your tax rate. It's totally unclear. They don't have a clue of how they're going to deal with, if they went to something like this, independent schools versus public schools. So, these are things that, could have a definite impact on you guys and, all the districts down the road. So that's my mission, just to kind of try to make sure you guys, when somebody walks up to you in the supermarket and asks you a question about one of these things, you'll be more prepared than you might otherwise be.
Jim, how often are you doing these updates?
My plan is, I just wrote down your next meeting is on the 18th, Meadowy on the 10th, and Taconic on the 11th. So I'd do an update before that series of meetings. So we tend to have monthly meetings, so I just try to provide, well, you have another meeting before that. You have another meeting very soon.
Yeah, so he's referring to the May meetings. He's
Okay.
not referring to your informational hearing and your annual meeting.
Okay.
So it's usually the districts are sort of in a bunch, and so I do it before that bunch. So I would do one in the very beginning of May to kind of let you know what's going on, and then once the legislature lets out, then I'll stop giving you updates. But the idea is while they're busy and things are going on, just to let keep you guys posted.
So, Dean, my guess is that you were probably aware of this, being on the BRSU, but I told Randy to go ahead and include this in the agenda packet just so that you guys would see it. But if you all think it's helpful, we can have Jim continue to send things and include them in the agenda packet.
I always find Jim's stuff helpful.
Dean's too nice.
Wait, Randy, or I'm sorry, Meredith, you're muted.
Yeah, I think it's very helpful as well.
Okay.
Okay. Because in here is, I'll actually give you a quick on the weighting study because I've actually, being on the VSBA board, I heard about an organization starting up, largely, well, started up by some school board members in Burlington to push the weighting study. And so I offered to be the guy from the VSBA board to, I actually have been going to all their meetings and been a participating member because, the weighting study, conceptually, it makes a whole lot of sense that, that weights have not been very good. I think, haven't really represented, there are a lot of school districts that are hurting because they have very high poverty, ELL, et cetera. And you have, that includes more, Vermont style urban and very rural. And it's interesting because there isn't a clear definition of who's there isn't a clear way to say, who's going to be hurt and who's going to be helped by moving to the proposed weighting. But I think the legislature was about ready to just avoid this completely this year. And this group of, it's about, there are probably 30 some school board members from about, 15 districts around the state. And they've been pushing, they hired a lobbyist to assist. And, it goes to show in Little Vermont, a group of people who sort of determined can have an impact. So it went from legislative leadership saying that, oh, we'll pick this up some other time, to they got enough pressure that they said, okay, Jennifer explained it perfectly that they created a new bill in Senate Education. That's Brian Campion's his committee, and they created a new bill that does set up the study group, but with an expectation that they will actually act and do something in January. I think there's a very clear recognition within the legislature that it can't be all at once. It has to be phased. And Laura Sibilia was the one who came up with another bill, H54, that phased it in over 3 years. And I think everybody's kind of on the idea that phasing over 3 years would be a good idea. For you guys, I think there's a big question mark, and I'm not sure whether Randy has, with a district like Taconic and Green, the numbers they're using to show how weighting would impact our district. They're using the free and reduced lunch numbers, the poverty sort of based numbers in our K-8 to apply to our K-12 because they don't have good data, I guess, for our 9-12. You guys have a big issue with that because you're sending all your kids out to elsewhere, and I don't know how good the data is. I don't know, Randy, if you have a feel the data for your students.
I haven't looked at things recently, so once we get something that's actually concrete, we'll be looking at all of it. The information that they're using at this point is from DCF. The question is, where are they getting that information from? DCF is maintaining that it's accurate. But I'm sort of, I have to be honest, I'm just not spending a lot of time at this point because it's all hypothetical, and things have been a little bit busy. So I don't have a lot of time to devote to kind of hypothetical numbers. I think that once we have something that's more concrete, once it looks like something's moving forward, I will spend whatever time we need to be analyzing all of our information, determine, make sure that what is being used is accurate, and whether or not there's action that I need to take with our independent schools, with our public schools, with DCF to make sure that we're all operating from the most accurate information. But I haven't done it yet.
So, I mean, that should not be Randy's job to do that, but honestly, I think there's a lot of confusion, even within this coalition, group that I've been taking part in. There's a lot of confusion about the poverty numbers that are being used. They're very different than what we're used to using. And it shouldn't be the job of any superintendent or school board to figure it out. But from my experience, expecting that it will actually be figured out at the state level is not a very good idea. We have to ensure that we shouldn't have to figure out the answers, but we should make sure that the answers are being figured out. That's something that would require some pressure down the road.
Yeah, and my guess is to the extent that we have, independent schools who are educating our students, they might have other ways of assessing need beyond, the free and reduced lunch, which wouldn't really be so applicable. But
right, that's what I'm saying, is that that's not what they're doing. DCF is collecting information some other way, and it's not through the standard application process for free and reduced lunch.
okay.
So they're not putting it on the backs of any school or school district at this point. So we just want to understand how they're calculating it and where they're getting the information. I would say, just considering the complexity of our system, I think it's possible that there could be errors in how they're approaching it. So,
and it's awkward when the basic measurement we always use in schools is not the measurement they're using for something that is so fundamental to schools. That's awkward in and of itself, and making it difficult for people to understand. But it's also, even if they had gone to free and reduced, then you have things like, the universal school meals was going to potentially have a very significant impact on our ability to continue to measure free and reduced lunch kids that well, because nobody would have to apply anymore. So it's, the interconnectedness of some of the things they do up there also is, it needs to be watched.
Well, Jim, thank you.
And as I said, if you guys have any, kind of going through and you have any questions, shoot me an email. I kind of like this stuff. I don't know why, but I kind of like it.
Well, it's our game for sure.
I did make a note on my agenda that I'll give to Celeste, saying that that you as a board would like to continue to include the monthly update from Jim in your board packet. So we'll make sure that happens through the rest of the legislative session.
Great.
Okay.
So I am sensitive to the fact that it's after 6, and I know that you guys have another meeting to go to. I think, we're done with the board updates. Agenda items for next meeting, that's going to be our information session, Q&A.
Yep. So that's it.
What's the exact date? What's the date of the next meeting?
April
The
26th.
Q&A is Thursday, the 22nd.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay.
And then town meeting is the 27th.
Okay.
Okay. I don't believe we have anyone else for public comment who's here. All right. Reflection on norms.
Nailed it.
I think we have a good system. So, all right. So the next meeting date will be the informational meeting via Zoom, April 22nd at 5 p.m. We'll send out the link, probably by the 15th or so, sometime within that week before.
Yeah, it'll be Thursday or Friday, probably of next week.
Okay, awesome. All right, so there's nothing further on the agenda. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All righty, thank you all.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks,
Thanks.
guys.
Thanks. Take care.